Hey everyone, it's Emily, and one of the coolest things about collecting physical Nintendo Switch games is that sometimes the games in your collection may be revised versions. What this means is that your actual physical game contains all of the latest updates and patches on the physical card itself, and you don't have to rely on the internet in order to download those patches like you would if you had a first run or a subsequent run. That's not the latest revision. So why is this important? Well, we live in a world where a lot of modern games require these updated patches in order to play them, or at least have a better experience when playing them. Now, not all games are like this. There are plenty of games that have great builds right at launch that really don't require much of an update, or if there is an update, it's just to fix maybe a word or two, or maybe some text alignment. So very minor issues overall, but some of the games have game-breaking bugs. And for these games in particular, it's nice to have some of these revised versions where you don't have to worry about not being connected to the internet in order to successfully play through your entire game. I made a video in the past on this very topic, but there's actually been a major update to how you actually read the codes on the back of your cartridge. So in today's video, I'll be walking you through how you could tell what revision your game cartridge is, and also some other resources to point out whether or not there are some games you might want to seek out some revised versions or not. But before we start, I wanted to note that not all games and not all publishers participate in this revised cart model, unfortunately. Even though this isn't more work and oftentimes it's not more expensive to reprint these carts with the latest patches, some of these publishers still just reissue the launch editions if they do go ahead and reprint their games. But there still are plenty of publishers who do participate and are well known for revising their carts whenever they have some sort of reprint. I'll be using a lot of Xenoblade Chronicles games as illustrated examples throughout this video. So I'm going to start off with the first game, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. Now, I got my copy out of the collector's edition. You can tell by looking on the back where it has an illustration of Shulk, and there's not that typical screenshot montage or a short paragraph of what the game's about. It also has the not for sale indication above the barcode. So that tells you off the bat this was from the collector's edition, which should also signal that this should be a first print run game, because all the collector's editions through Nintendo typically are all first print run games. So once you flip the game card over to the back side, you'll see a couple of different number configurations. The code that's written in light gray is where you want to specifically look to see what revision number this is. And with this old model, you'll see all these kind of letters and number combinations at the start of this code, but really what you want to look at is the last three values. And so here you'll see there's a 000. So this means that this is a first print run. So the origin or the zero revision of Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. So if I were to insert this particular card into my Nintendo Switch and I was connected to the internet, it would then prompt me to download the latest patch before playing. But for this first Xenoblade Chronicles game, there's no game-breaking bugs, so if you wanted, you don't have to download the patch and you could still proceed and complete the game perfectly fine. But if you are interested in what the latest patch was, you could actually research that online and see what was fixed or added in whenever there was some sort of patch, and see whether or not that patch was incorporated in the latest revision. Later in this video, I'll share you where you could actually look to see what the latest patches were for certain games, as well as whether or not there's a revised cart out in the wild that's been discovered and noted down, kind of what number to look for. But for now, let's just focus on how to read the back of these game cards. So I have the same thing for this standard edition of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 that I got at launch. On the back of the card, it has those 3 zeros at the end of the code, indicating this is a first print. But now let's look at my copy of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And I did not buy this anywhere close to launch. I actually made a video after there was, I think, a drought of copies floating around, and there was an initiative to reprint these games based on demand. And I bought this a couple years ago, and this actually has the latest patch on it. And this has gone through quite a number of patches and revisions. So if you look at the back of the card here, you'll notice that it has the code 006 at the end. So there are some games like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 that have a number of patches that are out in distribution. So trying to track down the latest revision can be a little bit tricky sometimes. And unfortunately, when it comes to brand new sealed games, it's impossible to know whether or not it contains a revised card inside without cracking it open. Now, there is something called revised cover art. This is unique just to Nintendo published games, but if you look at the backside of your game case, And right above where the barcode is, close to the spine, you'll notice that there's a string of numbers that have a letter at the end. And this indicates what version of the cover art is your game case. So if there's an A at the end of that code, that means that that is the first version of that cover art. And if there's a B, the second version, C, the third version, etc. But you'll notice here that Xenoblade Chronicles 2, even though it has the 6 revision game cartridge inside, it still has the A or the first print release cover art on the outside. So unfortunately, you can't use that as a way to know whether or not the game has been revised or not. I have a few other Nintendo published games to help illustrate this. For example, I have my copy of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and I got this way after release, I would say around 2020. And if we look at the back side of the cover, this has a B at the end of that code, meaning this is the second cover print. And if you look inside, the revised code is 003, so this is the third cartridge revision. So while my copy of Breath of the Wild has both a revised cover as well as a revised cart inside of it, those are not necessarily related to each other. I have another example here with Super Mario Odyssey, and on the back of the cover, I have a C in my code, meaning this is the third cover revision. And looking back at the cart itself, it is the third revision for the game cartridge. Now, it's totally possible that you go out in the wild and you discover a sealed Nintendo game that has a revised cover on it. You can maybe speculate that it's not going to be a first print run of the cart inside, especially if there are known revisions for that particular game, but you can't really know which revision it's going to be, unfortunately. So all the examples I've shared so far have been published by Nintendo, who are great usually at revising their carts whenever there's a reprint. There are exceptions, of course, but a lot of their games have seen revisions. So first up, I'll share one from Serenity Forge, who published Doki Doki Literature Club. And inside, we have the same 3-code structure on their game cart. So instead of seeing the first edition string 000, we have 004, and this is the fourth revision cart. Next up is one from Fangamer with Hollow Knight. And what's unique about Hollow Knight is that the back cover actually reveals whether or not this has a game revision cart inside or not. It's a little bit sneaky. It doesn't explicitly say that this is a revised version that contains the DLC, but they did say on their website that on the back cover image, if one of the photos looks yellow, like I have here, that means inside the game cart is going to be the revised version, not the launch edition. So it's going to contain all the updated patches and some of the new DLC that was included. Fangamer's done this with a few of their games now. I know they had a revision for Stardew Valley, though not with the latest updates and patches, but they indicated this with a sticker on the clear wrap outside the package. And they also did this for Amori, and I don't think there's any sort of indication on the box that you know that this has seen at least one revision. So the one I have has the first revision cart, not the launch edition. So those were a couple examples of games that do see revisions after the game has been reissued or reprinted. But unfortunately, most games that you'll encounter, especially out in the wild, will not be revised versions of the game, either because the publishers just don't revise their games if they do choose to reprint them, or you just happen upon a first print run of the game, which may be the largest batch that has ever been printed. But those were all examples of the old code. So we're going to move on and I'll show you how to identify the new code and tell which revision number it is. Starting with Xenoblade Chronicles X. Now this came out this year, and all games that have been published or reprinted this year will have the new code structure. And looking at the backside of these cards, it's going to be a little more difficult to read initially, but once you see what the structure is, it should be very easy to identify which revision number the game is. So I did get Xenoblade Chronicles X at launch, so this is a, first print version, both with the A cover art as well as the coding on the cart itself. Now, if we inspect this cart closely on the front, there's no major changes. This has the same sort of look that all Nintendo Switch carts have. If we flip it to the back side, you'll notice that that code structure is much different in the light gray. And it just looks like a jumble of letters and numbers together. But how you want to read this is you want to first omit the last 3 characters at the end of this code. These are not really important. They might be some sort of production code that is meaningless for our purposes. But the 2 characters to the left of those 3 are actually the codes that we want to look at, because this is how you can identify which revision number the game is. So it's no longer a 3-string number, code, it's now a 2-string number code. And it's going to be the same format as before. If you see a 00, that means this is a first print run game. If it had a 01, that means it's a first revision, 02, second revision, etc. So there is a little discrepancy here because the code says 01 and not 00. Though because I did pick this up at launch, there's no 00 codes in existence. So 01 is the launch edition for Xenoblade Chronicles X in this case. So even though this looks a bit more complicated than what we had before, it's very simple once you identify the spot to look at for the revision codes. Now, I don't have a ton of examples to pull from with this new coding structure because I haven't purchased a lot of new Switch games the past year, but I do have one that does fall under this structure. That is for Tokyo Xanadu EX Plus. Now, this also has that same code structure on the back. So this has the 00 digit on the back, which means this is a first print edition. Now, if you bought a game that was published prior to 2024, you still may see this new code on the back of your game card if there was a revision or a reprint after mid-2024. So I've seen that floating around for a few different games, most notably Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I've been seeing, while it's not a new revision, it's a new code structure to read which revision number it is. So don't be too surprised if you see that. You're going to be, again, reading those two different code structures in a different way, but they mean the same thing. Now that you know where to find what revision number your game card is, the next step is to figuring out what does that number mean and which patch does that coincide with. Now there's a great resource and fan-run group that does take note of all the revisions that they encounter out in the wild, so that those who are interested in which revision cards are out there and available, who can look at the spreadsheet to see which it coincides with. I've showed this off before, but this is a great resource to just identify, again, if you have a revision number that coincides with the latest revision that's been discovered, you can then see what version is on the cart, meaning what is the updated patch, and some other additional comments about what version or what version you'll need to download if it's not a complete on-cart Switch game. So if we go scroll down to my Breath of the Wild, you'll notice that the most up-to-date complete on-cart version that does not include the DLC is the revision number 003. So that is the one that I showed off. And if we go down to Xenoblade Chronicles, notice that there are a few different ones. So right now in USA, it's a little bit different from Europe, as you can see here for the PAL region. There is a first revision cart out in the wild. However, it does not have all the necessary patches. You'll still need to download 572 megabytes to get the version 2.2 running. So there is a bit of a region discrepancy sometimes in the codes or the revision numbers. So right now in PAL, there's only the launch edition, the 000 revision. So there are a couple things to consider. It's really nice to have complete on cart, of course, like for Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, because I have the launch version. I might want to look out in the wild and try to find a copy that has 003 on the back, so that I could just have the complete on cart and not have to worry about any downloads in the future. But not all patches or downloads are created equal. There might be some versions of the games where I don't want those patches incorporated already. Sometimes there are interesting bugs that you can exploit if you are a speedrunner, for example, or there might be some sort of funny bug that was left in at launch that they decided to take out later on. So sometimes those patches might be worthwhile, especially if there are significant changes or just makes the game run a lot better. But there are some patches that are maybe cosmetic or less important that you may not want to expand resources trying to hunt down. So this tab features all first-party Nintendo games, but if you're interested in third-party or indie games, you'll be looking at this tab, and you may notice that there are some discrepancies depending on region. For example, if we look at 2060 Read-Only Memories Integral, the US version from Limited Run Games is complete on cart. However, if you got the Japanese version, because maybe it's a bit easier to find and it contains English, so you can still play the game on that, it actually has an update that you'll need to download, and it's not totally complete on cart. But maybe just buying this game because it's a lot cheaper than the limited run version might be the way to go. I'll link to that spreadsheet down in the description of this video for those who also want to learn a little bit more about revised cartridges and use that as a resource to see if you have the latest update on your games. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it interesting and informative. As someone who really enjoys physical media and ownership, I find this topic really interesting. And while I may not try to seek out all complete on cart versions of certain games, I think just having awareness that this is a thing is great as a collector. And I'm curious to see how this is going to transition to the Nintendo Switch 2. I imagine it's going to adopt a similar structure to what we see now on all the newly issued and reprinted games that have been coming out this year. But if it's not, and it's a totally different structure, I'll definitely make a new video covering how you can read and understand what codes they are and whether or not Nintendo is going to continue with the revised cart method they've been doing throughout the Switch's life cycle. But until my next video, bye guys.